All right, hey everybody. Welcome to uh, applying to and getting into colleges, top tier colleges. Let me just bring this back up. There we are. My name's Justin Taylor. I am a college admissions consultant and expert. I am the founder of Well College Consulting. And tonight we are focusing on strategies, best practices for applying to the very top most selective schools. And we're going to look at some myths, we're going to look at some truths, and hopefully you'll end this webinar with a really strong feeling of what you can do to get yourself a better shot at some of these most prestigious universities. As I was saying, I'm the founder of Well College Consulting, and I come to this line of work as a writer. I'm a professional writer myself, and as well as consultant. And I love bringing my writing skills to this practice. And I got into consulting many, many years ago because my mother was a college admissions expert. And then I went on to work with several firms that do this kind of work and went to an Ivy League school myself. I'm a graduate of Yale and know the admissions process pretty well from the inside. All right. So let's get started with the agenda. So, like I mentioned, we're going to look at some truths and some myths about top 20 schools. We're going to dive into strategic majoring. So, one of the keys to applying to top schools is the kind of major you aim for. And we're going to talk about what is competitive at the top, what is really too crowded and difficult at the top, and what has more of an opening. We're also going to look at the specific qualities that top 20 schools look for. So there are qualities that colleges look for generally, but there are qualities that top 20 schools in particular are fishing for, and the kind of evidence they want to see in the application to support the story that you have these qualities. And again, that is kind of specific to top schools. We're going to talk about this thing I called your wow and how to discover that. This is really key for top schools, is nailing the wow, and essays for top tier schools. So I've given many webinars on essays generally for college, but for very, very top schools, there are certain things we want to do in essays, certain topics we want to go for and ones we want to not go for that I recommend. And then, of course, your questions. So if you have any questions, absolutely put those into the Q&A feature. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a button called Q&A. Click that, and you can type your question in there. When I get to the question section of today, I'll start opening that up and answering your questions live. And at that time, you can also jump into the chat and share your questions that way. But the Q&A is the best feature for getting questions to me live here and working things out together. All right, let's go. So truths and myths. The first thing about the top 20 list, this is not set in stone. According to whom, right? There's a US World News and Reports list that's pretty standard for a lot of people, which is a media outlet that famously puts together the top 100 schools list and the top 20 list. And they're not alone. There are many other media outlets that do this. Forbes does this. There's a website called Niche that does this. And they all have a different list. What schools are included or excluded can really vary. Some schools have very stringent admission rates that are on that list, and some schools in these media outlets, and some schools have more favorable admission rates. And so, is it by the popularity of the school with students according to student surveys? Is it according to the return on investment? What are the criteria to get into the top 20? And I want to say that for the purposes of our um, webinar tonight, and who's ever watching this video later, we're going to keep this about schools that have admission rates that are really restrictive, highly selective, below 10%. So that of course includes all the Ivies plus Stanford, Duke, U Chicago, but this includes a lot of other schools that you might not consider to be as stringent, like an NYU, a Williams, Tufts, um, and I would throw in there some schools that are really, really popular, but not quite so stringent in the admission rate, like UCLA, Boston University, University of Michigan. These schools that I just named have somewhat less serious, stringent criteria for what they're looking for, but I do consider them to be in these top 20 schools sometimes, in terms of the lists that are out there. But for our purposes tonight, it's these most popular schools with the highest admission rates, or the lowest admission rates, I'm sorry, that we're looking at. And that's around 30 schools, actually. It's not actually 20. The other thing I want to mention very briefly here before we dive into this is this question of what a top 20 school or top 30 school really does for a graduate, for someone who goes to one of these schools. And there are some myths out there about what this kind of school can do for one's life, and maybe some things that you don't know that it can do for your life. So first, I want to share that these top schools represent less than 1% of higher education. They have a humongous outsized power in our imagination in terms of their prestige, and in terms of their footprint in elite society, but their actual share of the student body nationally is less than 1%, okay? So that means that there's an enormous ecosystem of education that is available to students that is outside this tiny little pinprick, this tiny little window. And I want to share a little bit about, again, the difference between being in this top tier and not. So the first thing is graduating from one of these top tier schools versus graduating from a school that is also very rigorous, also a very strong education, but not in that list. There's no effect on income. If you compare the income mobility or the income increase of graduates from, like, let's say, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, or Emory, or University of Virginia, or UC Santa Barbara, to a Yale grad or a Harvard grad or a Stanford grad, the income impact is really not there. What does matter is that you do graduate from a really qualified university, a really strong university. That does have a huge impact on income. Just going to university, period, has a huge impact on income. But making it to that very, 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 very top doesn't. So I want us to all remember that when we're looking at applying to these places. However, these places vastly increase access to other elite spaces. So these schools are like gatekeepers to other elite spaces, like prestigious grad schools, prestigious firms in the public and private sectors. So like the McKinseys of the world, prestigious media companies, and government jobs, prestigious government jobs. That these are perhaps really attractive to students and really attractive to parents. And that's nothing wrong with wanting access to these kinds of spaces. But just so you know, that is the true benefit of going to a top 20 school, is that key to a certain doorway, to a certain kind of space. And that could be game changing. That could be truly game changing for certain people. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I've definitely worked with plenty of students who come from humble beginnings, who go into these schools and end up getting extraordinary access afterwards to all kinds of other prestige and elite space. So it can be a big deal. I'm not saying it's not. All right. So now just a few things before we dive in about applying to college generally that I just want to get out of the way really quickly. The first thing is when you're applying to the top tier, it should not be the only kind of school on your list. You want balance, right? There should not be more than 20% of your list that is in this top tier bracket. You definitely want the majority of your schools to be in the more mid-tier, less prestigious, less tightly selective schools, because it's a huge crapshoot at the top. We all know this, right? You can do everything I say in this webinar and increase your chances, and you still don't break through. This is not how I roll when I work with people privately. Most of the students I work with privately do break through. The vast majority do, more than 90%. But the truth is that at the very, very top, if you bank on it, you might end up with more tiers. And I don't want anyone to have more tiers, okay? So definitely don't forget the middle and the state school system when you're building your list. And think about things beyond prestige and elite status and access, right? You want to think about the regions you like, the academic focuses that really matter to you, and the alumni networks that look attractive to you, as well as cost, right? So this is a big deal for a lot of people. Some access to elite space, elite schools, top schools can bring in a large cost. So one thing I encourage everyone listening and watching to do is to try out this app. This is not affiliated with me at all. This is on the New York Times website. It's called your Build Your Own College Ranking app. And you can use this to literally build your own top 20. That's the most important thing to do when it comes to list building. Make your own top 20. Don't let the world tell you what's your top 20. Figure it out for yourself. And what's really great about this app in particular that I really like, is they have a setting on here. You can see it right on the screen to look at all kinds of things that most people don't really consider when they're looking at schools. So a lot of times you look at academic profile and the maybe the access to high earnings afterwards. But there's another thing that a lot of these schools sometimes do well and sometimes don't do well, which is be affordable, right? And provide economic mobility. These schools are famous for not letting in students from lower class and middle class high schools. They're famous for it. They're very famous for letting in students from the top 1%, because those students are often the children of alumni who give a lot of money and will become future alumni who will give a lot of money. And that is one of the cold truths about the top. It doesn't mean it's inaccessible, but it is one of the weird, funny things about it. We talk about affirmative action a lot in this industry, and there's definitely affirmative action for the wealthy in these top schools. Not all of them on the very top with very stringent admission rates are behaving this way, but a lot of them are. So you can, again, make your own top 20 list in this app. I love it. All right, so let's get into some strategies that you can do right now to up your chances at a top tier school. The first is to take a look at where you are aiming your arrow. Are you aiming for a particular college at a top tier school that is the most selective? Or are you aiming for one that has a slightly friendlier admission rate? So right off the bat, there are two kinds of colleges within a competitive top university. There is the main college, which is usually called the College of Arts and Sciences. Sometimes it's called the College of Liberal Arts. Um, this is a school usually with the most favorable admission rate. There is usually also on campus an engineering school or a business school that is named. We call these name schools. So name schools or name colleges with any university have even more restrictive admission rates. So for example, UPenn has an admission rate around 4 or 5. Wharton has one around 2. So Wharton is the business school inside of UPenn, right? We want to be very careful when we're trying to get into these top schools that we are not aiming for something that is really not going to happen. So I would stay away from the name schools as much as you can and just aim for the College of Arts and Sciences inside these top schools. Um, Cornell, for example, actually has 6 different colleges with 6 different admission offices inside of its system. And some of them are very favorable in terms of their admission rate. And the College of Arts and Science isn't even the most favorable. They have CALS, which is the School of Agricultural Sciences, in which you can get a fantastic degree that could be pre-med, all kinds of STEM degrees. It's not just for animal science or farming. That is a much more favorable admission rate than the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell. There's a College of Hospitality, people who want to go pre-professionally through school straight to a hospitality career, which is part of the business school. That's also a great jumping pad toward a grad degree in business, hospitality school, which also has a more favorable admission rate. So just to say, do some research, like really open up the websites of these places. This is something I do with all of my students. We look at what are the most attractive admission rates across what's on offer at a top tier school. Now about majors. So right off the bat, I want to show you this list here of the most competitive majors. And these are the majors I tend to steer students away from unless they have certain qualifications, which I will go over. These are computer science, economics and business, engineering, and pre-med. So econ, business, and engineering almost always point at the name schools, the engineering schools and the business schools. Sometimes it's inside of an international studies school or school of global affairs, the econ stuff. It depends. Computer science can also be in an engineering school. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's in the College of Arts and Sciences. Pre-med is always going to be in the College of Arts and Sciences. But the thing about pre-med or computer science or econ, which is often also in the College of Arts and Sciences, is that so many students apply for these majors that it restricts your admission rate even more. And you want to do things that expand it, that grow it, that make it even more comfortable for you. So I recommend looking for alternative majors that are more niche, that are more specific to you, and less competitive. So here's just a few. When I work one-on-one with students, we spend a lot of time getting this really clear and making sure we are aiming for majors that, like I said, are niche and less competitive. So you're going for computer science, but that's super competitive. Maybe math is more interesting to you because it is less popular. You want to do econ, everyone else does. Maybe you want to do something like sociology or psychology or even anthro, which can have an overlap, a big overlap with econ. Anthro can also have a really great overlap with the classic pre-med route, which is chemistry, bio, and molecular bio. Those are the classic pre-med majors. You want to avoid those usually, depending on the student. I will say more about who I think actually qualifies to go after these majors. Uh, Public health, I think, is a really great choice as well for anybody who's interested in pre-med. It's got a lot of STEM in there, but also a lot of health advocacy. History is also really great for students who are interested in pre-law, but poli-sci being super duper popular, also I would say is a difficult one to commit to. So I often encourage stuff like history. Um, think about like what are some of the majors that don't like directly feed into lucrative careers? Those are the ones I think tend to be more favorable in terms of admission rates. Um, if you do want to apply for one of those competitive majors that I mentioned, and you don't have these like, stratospheric qualifications that I'm going to name in a second, apply to a lower tier school with that major. That's totally cool. There are so many schools that have humongous departments devoted to these majors because they are so popular. So you can get a very solid pre-med experience at a mid-tier school, computer science at a mid-tier school, econ, engineering, etc., inside of a regular College of Arts and Sciences program. These are absolutely available at most universities in the mid-tier. I highly recommend looking at these as alternatives if you really do want to go kind of down the center and do these meat and potatoes degrees. All right, so what are the qualifications for applying for like computer science at a Yale or a Harvard or an MIT or a pre-med at a Brown or a Cornell? So one thing you want to look for, or the schools are looking for, are national rankings and awards. So you are the champion of something in the United States, literally, or globally. You're the champion globally or nationally for something academic. That usually is one thing they're looking for. They're looking for uh, really strong extracurriculars at really well-known organizations or firms, basically internships at if you're doing pre-med, hospitals. If you're doing computer science, maybe CS research labs inside prestigious universities that you've joined as a high school student. If you are doing business or econ, you've done important internships in major national firms. These are the things that they tend to need to see. Or you've had some kind of huge achievement, like you have started a business that took off, or a nonprofit that took off, or you made a video about the topic that went viral and has tons of views, or you have 1 million viewers on a social media platform. So these kinds of big achievements are, again, something they're looking for at the very top in these particular majors. However, outside of these majors, there is room. There is room. You don't need to have this giant horse that you're riding in on to get in. And so that's where I'm going to be focusing our attention in today's webinar is what can you do beyond getting these huge, big wow achievements to be competitive at these schools outside of these very, very popular majors? So the first thing I recommend you do is to strengthen in 2 academic areas, not just academically, but in your engagement outside of school. Oh, cool. I got balloons. So one reason is because there's only so many top rankings out there for people. You can't be the national debate champion and someone else be the national debate champion. Like there's only one of you. So so we need to find things that get us competitive. So one reason you get two areas of expertise or to go after that is that it starts to create this niche major that I mentioned earlier. So, for example, let's say you love debate at school and you go really, really far in your debate competition, but you also love oceanography and marine biology and marine science. Well, you might want to go after a degree in ocean advocacy. And believe it or not, that is absolutely on the table at Harvard and other schools, Brown. That is absolutely on the table. Let's say you are absolutely in love with computer science, you can't let it go, and you love history. Maybe you didn't do a ton of computer science prestigious research at U Chicago or some other fancy university, but you have a lot of really strong engagement within history and within computer science. Maybe you won a history bowl, or you've been a part of some pretty interesting computer science research at a lesser known university. You could foreseeably talk about going after a degree in tech law or policy. Tech law and policy, really big deal right now. Tech law in particular, if you're going after law school, really hot, hot, hot. So if you are interested in understanding how to create a niche major for yourself, that is absolutely what I do with my students when we work one-on-one. And if you want to chat about it in the Q&A later, let's do it. So the other thing about choosing a major or a niche major I want to say here is that it's not smart to just pick something that is unusual just because you need to be unique. It needs to really matter to you. It needs to actually connect to your story. So you want to be going after passions that you genuinely have and not just something that will bring you differentiation, okay? And it's important when you're writing your application that your story and your major are connected. So that when you're writing your essays, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, you are sharing that story in your essays. That's going to help you really, really land in the admissions office. Okay, we'll talk about that. Okay. Also, very briefly, I just need to make a little plug here for making sure you get in your APs and your IBs and your college level coursework, because it is the #1 metric for college admissions at the top, but everywhere else, right? This kind of goes without saying. You don't need me to say it probably, but just to make sure I say it and you get it in here. They're looking for, top schools are absolutely looking for the core competencies are on lock. There is zero remediation required to admit the student. Remediation means there is nothing the school needs to do to bring the student up to a top tier university academic level in any subject whatsoever, or any core subject, I should be saying, any core subject whatsoever. So that's the core subjects your school requires you to take in high school. Those are your core competencies. So APs and all your core competencies are pretty much de rigueur, meaning they are required at these top tier schools. Then you want to be having college level work, APs, IBs, and community college and beyond in your niche. So when you go beyond the core competencies, you need to start having a stack of courses in your niche. So let's say you were like, hey, that student who loved debate and oceanography, this student would need to be having maybe a community college course or 3 in marine science, plus maybe something on policy or rhetoric or communication that dovetails with the love of debate. That would also possibly be at a community college or selective APs, niche APs that your school might have. If they don't, you want to get them online or again at the community college. But the student that goes after this and takes this into their own hands really stands out. And frankly, these are the kinds of students that get admitted. The students that go after courses that are maybe not on offer at the high school, but uh, they go and find them anyway. All right, zooming ahead. The next little bit here is about character. So aside from academics, GPA, and tests, um, it is really comes down to what I call the character side of the application that schools that opens the door, if you will. This is everything you're doing that shows up on the resume. This is everything that you would talk about in an essay and that your recommenders would talk about in their letters. These are the things that can really make or break an application. Having a 1500 plus SAT will not get you in anywhere at the top. It just won't. They reject thousands and thousands of students who have 1500 plus SATs, perfect ACTs, 4.0 plus GPAs. This is no problem for these top tier schools. What they're going after are students who show certain character traits that I'm going to now enumerate for you. So the first thing is just what they talk about, what the name they give this student, which is the citizen student. So this is a student who's not just academically a superstar, they are also very engaged in their community, like a citizen, right? And they're passionate about it. They're passionate about what they want to do and what the impact they want to have, and how they pursue enjoyment. These things are very aware in the mind of a citizen student. They also sometimes call this student the ethical student, or the citizen scholar, or the mini expert, or the autonomous learner. This is essentially someone who shows up at a university with a very strong drive to learn and to make a difference. Like I said, there's a passion for learning, but it's not just about academics. And we're going to get into this. They're drawn to society's what I call big, hairy problems. They want to change income inequality. Oh, there's more balloons. They want to change pollution in the ocean. They want to change race inequality. The big things in our society. Maybe they're doing it at a level that's closer to home, more local to their community, but it's still a big, hairy problem, right? Bigger than one person could solve. That's really important to show in an application. And the other qualities, resilience, grit, authenticity that I have here, I would say are really standard things schools look for, even outside of the top tier, but also very key to share. And again, this should all be in the rec letters, essays, resumes, interviews. All this stuff needs to be shown when you're applying to top schools. So now I want to talk to you about a case study, a student I had last year, and she really, to me, typifies what following this advice can do for your admissions prospects. So Mila is a student from Virginia. She was a star at her school. She was, strong GPA, really, really strong in the sciences and in her engagement outside of school doing health advocacy work. She really liked public health as a major. And she was really keen to get to the top. She really wanted it. But there were some problems, right? First of all, she didn't have a 1500 plus SAT. She had a 1400 plus SAT. She did not have any prestigious awards, no prestigious national rankings, no prestigious internships at big name firms. And again, like her SAT for the very top was not so shiny and hot. And she came to me after working with other consultants who told her that she either needs to boost her SAT or her resume or basically don't apply. And this is very bad advice. This is not giving enough credit to the admissions office of top schools because these are human beings who are actually looking for people like Mila. This was a horrible idea. I'm really thrilled we connected. So Mila did a process I'm now going to show you. And then you're going to take a little bit of time in this webinar to start it yourself. Okay. Everything I do with my students starts with this image. This is the image I use to help students find their wow. So this is how you find your wow. You identify passions and look at where they might overlap. So academic passion, which is what it sounds like, it's your intellectual pursuits in school. There's a civic passion, which is the impact you want to have on your community or the world. And then there's your heart passion, which is something that just brings you joy that you could get up at 4 a.m. or stay up till 4 a.m. to do. And you want to make your entire application about these three passions over and over and over and over. The overlap of these three things is your wow. So you can talk about separate passions, but where they overlap, no one else has that same overlap. No one does. You are unique in having that. And so sharing that in your application, really, really key. So Mila and I spent a good amount of time looking at this. So what did we find? She was a science lover that I've told you. She was really interested in improving Black lives. She grew up in an army family as she moved around the world. And her race was always a big issue wherever she went. She lived in Germany, she lived in England, she lived in the US, she lived in Asia. And the reaction to her race was different everywhere. And she saw that for Black people, there is some real challenges, and that really mattered to her. And she really got passionate about improving the lives of Black people, where she ended up living in high school in Virginia. And at the same time, she was a big science nerd. She did little lab science experiments at home, like running labs on different kinds of food and antibiotic foods, using kitchenware as petri dishes. Like, she was that kind of person. And she really wanted to educate people in her community about proper diet. And so she created a little program and a nonprofit called Diet Dialogue that she used to talk to people in her community at farmers markets, at churches, and stuff like that, about ways to balance out what people are eating so that their health improved, because there was so much obesity. And so she wrote an essay about the public health crisis in her town. Interesting, she wants to be a public health major. So she wrote an essay that was almost like a public health expose that you might print in a newspaper about the food crisis in her town and the work that she was doing to educate her neighbors about proper diet, which also expanded into her journey with Blackness. She also explored that a lot in her in her supplements. And her number one choice was Yale. And she did everything she could to get into this school. She even went to in-person info sessions out of state. She drove out of state to in-person info sessions, I think in DC, to make sure that someone from the admissions office at Yale met her. And it worked. She got admitted early to Yale, and it was a closed book. Amazing work for this student. Amazing, amazing. And I just want to remind you, she had a 1400 plus SAT, not a 1500 plus SAT. She did not have any fancy rankings, nothing, no big national wow thing at all. And she did it because she found that little niche inside of a major that is not the most popular, and that showed that strong desire to make an impact. She also had a very strong heart love of singing and that is a big deal at Yale. So that also helped her. All right, so now I want you to take just a couple of minutes to try and do this yourself a little bit. Um, when I work with students privately, this is something we spend a lot of time on, but just to see what it could be for you, take a moment right now to just jot down in your phone and take a quick note on a piece of paper. What are some academics that you love? And get as niche as you can. Find two that could overlap. Or it doesn't even if you can't imagine them overlapping, go ahead and find the two that you really love. And work on overlapping them maybe later. But just go ahead and make a list right now of your school subjects, your intellectual pursuits that you could stay up till 4 a.m. reading about, watching YouTubes about, listening to podcasts about, or just talking about. Those are the things you want on this list. The next thing you want to find is that big, hairy problem you would love to impact with your degree. So you're pursuing a degree at a top tier school, you're getting some expertise. What do you want to change in your community around you or in the world at large that is an endemic problem? That is, big hairy problems are problems that not just one person can solve. They're endemic. They're problems we all share. And, the dream of universities is to create these utopic societies, these sort of model societies where the big problems get solved. You might call them model democracies in a way. But the ideal of the university is that they are developing the future leaders that will crack the code on big hairy problems like the cancer moonshot, right? So having something like this clear for you really going to help. The last, activities that light you up, activities that just bring you joy. That could be in the arts, theater, music, singing. It could be something like in nature, walking and hiking in nature. It could be skiing, snowboarding. Maybe it is something more about engagement, like you really love volunteering and giving back or educating younger people. That lights you up. So make a list of those things. And then you want to see, after you've made all these lists, then you want to see where they might overlap. And again, we don't have time at this very moment to look at that together, but I definitely encourage you to spend some time looking at this. When I work with students, we research majors at schools. We look all over the place for where this overlap might exist in the world already. And then we even start to develop a game plan for engagement to develop expertise in that niche. Does your resume and transcript tell the story of the overlap of these three things, or even that they might be adjacent to each other? If it doesn't, you need to start doing more engagement that can help tell that story. Or if it's too late and you're a senior, no worries at all, but you need to change possibly what you communicate, what you broadcast in your application as your wow. Maybe it's time to look at working with what you got as your wow. All right, so just a little bit about resume boosters. Super duper key for top schools. They need evidence that is not just like, I joined a club. They need college level evidence of your wow. So like I mentioned, a student who loves oceanography and debate. The student should be having college level research in oceanography on their resume to be really competitive at these top schools. The student Mila, for example, did have some college level research in antimicrobial foods that got published. And so that's number 5 here. That wasn't at a prestigious school, but she did have it. College mentored, meaning like there is someone who is a professor or grad student at the university who's overlooking the research. That's really, really helpful. Now, If it's not someone at a university, but let's say you're getting mentorship from somebody who is an expert in their field, let's say you are a more econ-oriented student or business-oriented student, maybe your mentor is going to actually be out in the commercial world, in the professional world. Same for certain STEM students like technology, engineering. A lot of times you can find mentors that are in the profession. That can also be great. So having a professional mentorship like this, like I've written here, that's also super important. Some kind of exposure to the profession on the resume, really important. If you are a sophomore or a junior or a freshman, I work with a lot of students in those grades to find those mentors and those internships. And if you are also in those grades, start a business, start a nonprofit, like be about it. Go ahead and stake your flag in the ground and create a organization of some kind that is pursuing that niche, that is about that niche, making that impact. Again, it doesn't have to be incredibly active all the time because you're a busy high school student, right? But having something like that that you're working on can really expose you to whether you love it or not, and doing the hard work to pursue it. Is that worthy of your time? That's very cool to learn. And B, colleges love things that students initiate. That's the number one thing. It's one thing to get a really cool internship in a prestigious firm, but it's another thing to have started your own organization that you lead. That is like that, and especially if it goes somewhere, they love that in the admissions offices. So Mila, for example, had dialogue. They loved that. The fifth thing, you must document these engagements. So get the science published, get an editorial in the local news published, go to a town council meeting and talk about your issue if it's up for discussion in a town hall meeting, and get in the minutes of the meeting and have that document available, because what you are going to want to do after you submit this glorious application and with glorious essays is upload all of these documents to what's called the portfolio. And the portfolio is not required. It's not even talked about a whole lot, but I guarantee you, students that get in and students that don't get in, the students that get in have portfolio elements. They're sharing the lab reports, they're sharing the science abstracts, they're sharing the research abstracts, they're sharing the articles, and then letters from mentors that help their work. These are all important things you want to be collecting, cataloging, and uploading to the portfolio of the specific school after you submit the Common App. If you need help finding, again, internships, researchers, I do connect students to researchers and internships. I'm part of a network of people that can provide this. So again, part of the service that I offer. A lot of students ask about this thing called demonstrated interest. So before I get to questions and all of that, I just want to briefly go through what this is. So this is the students' efforts to get to know a school, make contact with the school. And at a lot of universities, this is tracked and students earn points for it. But at the very top, this is not tracked because schools know they are incredibly popular at the very top. And so they don't put in the extra effort of tracking student engagement, because they know if they say yes to the student, it's a very high probability the student will say yes back. This is something called yield. Yield is a big concern for a lot of schools, but at the very, very top, it is not. The other thing about demonstrating interest, a lot of students that I work with ask me if I use like a family connection to the admissions office or to the leadership of the school and like get to know them, will that boost my chances? And the answer is frankly, flat out, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. Your uncle could be best friends with the president of Columbia. And I've literally had students who had that kind of connection to the president of Columbia and, had like personal calls with these people. It did nothing for their admissions because these schools are very, very, very aware of this kind of interaction and very aware of the appearance of nepotism. So this will not get you any points. It really, really doesn't. So I don't put your energy into it. However, if you are the alumni, the child of an alumni, uh, that does matter. So that's a whole other conversation that we kind of talked about in the beginning. Uh, if you do go for a student for demonstrated interest, what's most important is to show up in person to things. So what Mila did, driving out of state to go to the in-person info session with Yale in DC, she met the admissions dean of Yale. She made a personal connection to him. They chatted, and the dean said, "I'm going to remember you, Mila. Just, I have you in my mind now." So that, is demonstrated interest right there, right? But because she went in person and made that personal connection, that dean had no choice uh, but to remember her. And so, and she checked all the boxes that the school likes. And so I think all of that clinched it. So that is the one kind of demonstrated interest I would say really matters, is when you make a personal connection with admissions officers in person. Now, of course, there are Zoom info sessions you can attend as well, but there's nothing like going in person. So if you have the chance to do that when they make the tours around this fall, go for it. The other kind of demonstrated interest I think is worthy is directly to professors at top universities and current students. Um, Talking about your interactions with professors and current students is a really great thing to do in your essays, especially your supplements, not your main essays, but in your supplements. I really recommend having stories like this because it shows you really know the school and you really see yourself there, and helps them see that you could be another student in the next freshman class. Last thing about demonstrating interest, there is this one quirky feature of top tier schools for athletes. So I'm not talking about being a recruited athlete here. That's a whole other specialty that I don't do, but there is a mini subset for high achieving athletes that are not trying to be recruited, which is to be named on the walk-on list. So it is the policy at universities that every athletic team hold tryouts. So even though almost everyone on the team of like the Yale football team or the Yale tennis team or the Harvard fencing team is recruited, they, by the rules, have to offer tryouts to any student. It's just the old rules is how it works. Again, ideal democracy, utopia. They have to do open tryouts. And sometimes they pull students from open tryouts to be the second or third string team player. And they're not getting a lot of coaching. They're not at every practice, but they can join a team that way. Students are in no way obligated to be a part of an athletic team if they try out for it. But sometimes coaches will add a student to a walk-on list before they are admitted. So if you are a competitive athlete that is performing very well and competing nationally, this is really for students that are like competing at a high level. Reach out to the coaches and assistant coaches directly at the school and ask, are you taking applicants for the walk-on list? And share everything that you have, your reel and your sports stats and all of that, so that they can see you're legit, your sports resume, I mean, so they can see you're legit. And when you are on the walk-on list, which is not a recruited athlete, like I'm telling you, you get a little bit of a boost in admissions. So that is one thing for high achieving athletes that I recommend if you're not going for the recruited athlete route. Excuse me. All right, very briefly about essay topics. I have a whole webinar devoted to this. I'm not going to go into it very deeply here, but I just want to cover it very briefly for anybody who's new to me. The number one thing with essays in general is you want an essay that lingers in the mind of the reader that no one else has, right? That comes down to topic selection. That comes down to having discerning advice from someone like me or your counselor at school. I don't recommend using the Common App prompts to write your essay. I don't think they inspire original writing. I actually have other exercises that I give to students to inspire more interesting topics and stories. I'm going to show you that in just a second. The one key thing I do with students applying to the top is I give them the structure of a discovering your passion essay or a patchwork essay. A discovering your passion essay is similar to what Milo wrote, which is you treat your big passion like it's this horse that you're riding into the university on. It's like you're riding this prize-winning horse into the university. And so it could be the story of the student that creates that nonprofit that helps get animals that are abused on the street into vet care and shelters. It could be a student that creates that business that teaches financial literacy to their community and helps young people build wealth in a community that has a very big wealth gap. So that's the kind of essay I'm talking about. The second thing is what I call a patchwork essay, in which the student is showing the reader basically how they merge all of their passions. They basically go into a kind of more sophisticated riff on these passions, and they bring them together in a cohesive essay. Like I had a student last year who did a patchwork essay based on playing his favorite piano piece. So piano was his heart passion, but his love was business, or I mean, his academic love was business, and his civic love was financial literacy. So he wrote an essay about playing the piano and how that helped him think through business problems and think through educating more people about business skills. And he had a great season. He got into some really choosy top schools. I think now he's going to USC, which is in that top 20, top 30 list. Also, very briefly, the name of my company is named after this acronym. I share this again for anybody who's new. The first W is the want. What would you get up at 4 a.m. to do? This could be academic, or it could be the heart passion or the civic passion. This is really key to get into an essay somewhere, the main essay. The O is original voice, original stories. So your authentic personality, your authentic voice really comes through when you're telling the story of your passions. So something else I like to bring out with my students. And lastly is to share wisdom. So there needs to be space in your essays for reflection, where you are not just sharing an engaging story, but you are analyzing it. You're talking about what you're learning about yourself and the world as you're pursuing what you love. And these should be all woven through. Again, I'm being very, very on the surface here, but for anybody who is new to me, that's something I really love to get out there. This is the college essay starter. This is the thing I use with most of my students to get those niche subjects, where I make people drill really deep and look at what are their passions, what are the weird routines they have in their life, what are the big challenges they faced, and what are the what are their weird like objects and places that they kind of hang on to and linger and love. All right. So I all of that can be free. If you want any of those tools, you can get those from me for free. Just email me. The last thing I say to close here is that this is how applying to college can feel for everybody, right? You feel like you are in a sea of highly qualified suitors, all pursuing the one sought after prestigious college, and she only has one rose to hand out. And this can be really demoralizing and energy sapping to think of college admissions this way. But when we follow these steps I've outlined here, it's more like this. The colleges are the suitors, and you are the one with the rose who gets to choose them, who gets to make the choice of the school. When you have that kind of confidence in yourself, you're in really good shape. It means you've done that strong engagement work, you found that niche major, and you've documented it, and you're sharing it in engaging, smart essays. Get started now, not later, obvious. All right, briefly about me before I get into questions. You've heard a bit about what I do with people. I obviously have that free essay starter. If you want it, you can have it. And I also do one free 30-minute consultation for anybody who wants it. So if that's you, email me. Let's get into our calendars. Happy to meet you and give you a free consultation on either choosing a major, choosing a school, your essay, whatever you'd like. Let's get it done. I do, of course, the meat and potatoes of my work is a one-to-one application coaching, and I don't work with students and then hand students off to another counselor. I work with everybody in the one-one setting. I keep my practice small so that I can give 100% of my attention to my clients. So if you're interested, I do have a 10% off rate for the next week for anybody who signs up for one of my packages, who's attended this webinar. And if you don't want a full package, you want like an essay review, like that kind of thing, a once over, I also do that for people. So do reach out to me if you want any of that. All right, now for questions. Let's do it. Okay, let's see here. Okay, Q&A. So let's see, I have a few here. The first student says, is it worth to spend a lot of money going to a top tier school and then you end up with a major that you're not happy about? Could you just shoot your shot for the more competitive majors? Okay, that's a great question. When you get into a school, you can change your major, as long as that major is inside the College of Arts and Letters. Changing your major to a major that's in one of the very selective name schools. Let's say you get into the College of Arts and Letters at UPenn, and you're like, I really just want to go to Wharton. It's very hard to transfer into Wharton. There are some ways to do it, but if you change your major from, let's say you chose linguistics at UPenn, but really you want to be doing more like econ, it's much, much easier to apply to do the econ major in the College of Arts and Letters, to change your major to that out of something like linguistics or history, than it is to try and jump into Wharton. So I would say go for the major that does fit you, and is less competitive. And then when you're in the school, change it later. That's my number one advice. And a lot of my students end up doing this. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, you definitely don't want to be spending a lot of money on a major that you don't want to do, right? It's also, there are some students who take this advice about choosing a less competitive major and go for something that simply is not a fit. Like I had a student a few years ago who was a very strong business student. He had all of those criteria I mentioned for name schools, you know, the prestigious internships, tons of engagement, tons of civic engagement in his community. And everyone was telling him, oh, apply as Asian studies. And then the student happened to be Asian. And the family just threw their hands up in the air and didn't like this advice at all. Thankfully, they came and found me. And that student and I really committed actually to applying to these name schools because he had the qualifications. So, and he got in. He got in everywhere. He got into Wharton. He got into all the name schools, the Georgetown McDonough School, the U Michigan Ross School. He ended up actually going to Haas at Berkeley on a full scholarship. That scholarship was hard to turn down. Um, so that's a story of a student that really didn't take the bad advice to just pick any random major you don't want. Yeah, don't do that, anybody who's listening. Don't do that. That's a terrible idea. Thank you for that question. All right. I'm a senior applying for CS to top colleges, including some Ivies as well as some competitive public schools. Should I consider instead applying for marginally less competitive majors such as engineering majors? Okay, yes. I highly recommend you apply for the least competitive STEM major you can that is still adjacent to computer science. The thing about computer science is almost every STEM major now is a computer science major. Physics is a computer science major now. Basically, almost everything is being done in software. Almost everything you do in these majors now is being done in this advanced software and computing, where you are designing other software to run experiments. So, and build devices that can run experiments and so on. So I would say that computer science is embedded in most schools, in most programs. If you are, again, really credentialed, like I said, you have really strong research at a university already that you've done, I would say go ahead and go for a computer science major at a top school. They are going to be choosing students that have already done something at a university, at a research institute in a university in computer science. Those are the students who get chosen to do computer science at the Ivies. The one exception might be Brown. Brown actually has their largest major is computer science, if you can believe it or not. Even though it's the most like famous for being liberal arts, it's actually there because it's the most popular major in the country. And so that might be a case by case basis for you. Like maybe for computer science at UC Berkeley, maybe you'll go for something less competitive. Or at Carnegie Mellon, maybe something less competitive, where CS is like the number one, right? But at Harvard, at Yale, it's going to really come down to why you want to do computer science as well, not just what credentials you have. Again, that engagement piece is really key. So that's something else I would be looking at. This is a trickier one. I would need to talk to you like one-on-one, I think, to get more of your background to answer this in a really like substantial way for you or substantive way for you. But I hope some ideas there helped you. All right. Is it a bad look if I took AP courses and all core competencies, as well as some chosen concentration advanced courses, but not for history? I'm a STEM major. You need something social science. You need one AP that's social science. So if it's not history, it should be econ, sociology, something that is social science. You can't get past this. Like Cornell, the people who ran Cornell, I work often with the guy who was the dean of admissions at Cornell, and like history majors had to have AP calculus to get in. They're never going to use AP calculus, but those core competencies need to be on lock. So yes, you need some sort of social science in your transcript for top schools. It's just the way it works. If you don't have it and you can't get it in, you can't like do like an online course or something. Apply anyway. See what they say. For schools that are not top tier, I would say it's not an issue. I would say STEM majors at top tier schools, this is an issue, but outside of the top tier, no, it's okay that you just have some really strong expertise in your concentration and most of your core competencies. All right. Can you speak to how someone can find out the popularity of a major? Is there published material to refer to? This is a very good question. I uh, have looked for this myself. Um, there are stats that get shared inside of the college counselor world that where we survey schools. Um, and these don't get shared publicly very much. But the one thing you can do is to look up the oh, what is that called? It's the yeah, the data set. So every university has to make public this thing called the data set. So if you literally Google something like Harvard data set, there's a page on their website where they will share the breakdowns of everything about the school, the number of students who applied, the number of students who were admitted, the number of men and women, the number of students who are under each major. The thing that you won't see in the data set is the admission rates for name schools. They don't give that information there, but you will get the admission rates for the overall university. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Yeah, this one's tricky, but the list that I gave you is legitimate. Those are the majors that have the most bottleneck issue. Outside of those, everything else I would say is fair game as long as it's not in a business school or an engineering school. I would say is fair game. I would say the least popular majors are things like history or like lit, like English. These are less and less and less popular. So those are areas where you could probably have less competition, I'm going to say, in the admissions process. All right, so I am stumbling over my words a little bit because I am racing, because I am seeing the time. I want to thank you all for your fabulous attention and your fabulous questions. Email me at the email on the screen if you have anything else that you want to ask me. I'm happy to answer it. And if you want to ask me again for um, a 1-1, a free 1-1, I'm happy to give it to you. If you want to get my essay starter, also happy to give that to you. And again, there's a 10% off deal going on for the next week. All right, everybody, take care and stay in touch, and all the best to you for your admissions. Be well.